Hmm.
Right. Hi, everybody. I'm Joy, and this
I'm
is
Joe.
with the Descendants Project. Thank you all. I think everyone knows that by now, and we are joining you here in Wallace for our 1 year anniversary. A little bit over our 1 year anniversary of our victory over Greenfield development. So today we just wanted to sort of check in with everybody and talk about our victory in this year anniversary. Things may have seemed from the outside that they have slowed down, but we still have some loose ends that we're tying up with Greenfield. But wanted to join our friends, our allies, otherwise known as our attorneys and experts, in talking about Greenfield. Just yeah, reflecting on that whole process. Can't believe that it's been 5 years since when we first sort of heard about Greenfield, and so we wanted to take some time today to reflect, especially in the event and in hopes that this will be useful to other communities that are in facing the same threats and same challenges. So before we begin, I would like to introduce our wonderful panel that's here with us today. And I'm starting with Kimberly Terrell from the Environmental Integrity Project. And we have Pam Spees from the Center for Constitutional Rights. We have William Most from Most and Associates. And we have Justin Kray from Hidden Landscape.
I feel like we should have some champagne or something. This feels odd to celebrate, and we have champagne right next, like in the refrigerator next to us. So I really feel like we should have.
You are more than free to go grab it and crack it open.
Because it really is a. I can't believe that we're here after the 5 years, but able to last year and able to that project was canceled. So even that seems like a very long time. So especially the 5 years when it all started seems even longer, of course. But yeah, I'm just happy that we are here.
Yeah, you think that, and no joke, we actually do have a bottle or two of champagne that we were going to break out and celebrate all together, and we still will. But I think it goes to show you, like, you have this idea of when these projects are canceled, and Lord knows how much I can't tell you how much we prayed and how much we talked about what we're going to do when Greenfield leaves, because we knew that we were leaving. We were always hopeful, and we knew that they were leaving. And then, quite honestly, like after it all happened, we were so tired afterwards, right? And it's not like you just have this moment of rejoicing. Quite honestly, you're always still preparing for what is the next thing that's going to happen. So we've never been able to just like release it all and be like footloose and fancy free. We've always been on our guard, and I think it's smart for us to be on our guard.
Yeah, I think, well, it's also, you have celebration, but then it's also dealing with trauma. And that's when I first realized, like, oh, wow, we are traumatized by the trauma is going to take some time to get over. But at least we are past that. I think that stage now, and it's always, we are preparing, but it took a long time to get here. And yeah, I'm happy we have this conversation today.
Yeah, so what we'll do is, I was going to give sort of a timeline review of Greenfield, but y'all, no joke, looking back at it, the amount of permit comments and petitions and briefs and all, it was daunting. Like I literally think, like, I cannot do a timeline. I will put together a resource, a timeline, a manual, but it's going to take some time. Like, it's not easy to just say, oh, just present to you. And so it just reminded me how intense and how many steps and layers are of this process. But I will just start off with saying how we first. I'll start off with saying how we first learned about Greenfield. Initially, it started off with rumors in the community that a grain terminal was looking for a place on the West Bank. And so from there, me and Joe, we let community members know, and we were like, be on the lookout for it. And I had contacted Kim Terrell, had been given her information and recommended that, I contact her. At the time, she was at Tulane Environmental Law Clinic. So contacted her, told her this is what I heard of. Could she please look out for me? And it was in March of 2021, maybe 4 or 5, 6 months afterwards, where Kim emailed me and said, Joy, that grain terminal that you were looking for, I saw the public notice, a joint public notice that went out today. So immediately Kim notified me that was there. And then I think it was one of the worst days, literally one of the worst days of my life. So, I have some questions that I'm going to ask, and I'll kind of start with Kim, because that question is, you briefly explain how you first became involved in the case and what your role. But I'll just kind of pass it off to you to talk about how we first talked and how what you first learned about the grain terminal.
Yeah, I remember I was sitting at my kitchen table and it was in the middle of COVID, and it felt really strange to be working from the kitchen, which feels really normal right now. And Joy had reached out to me about a couple different issues, one of which was the grain terminal. And the really frustrating thing was that the day she reached out to me, there was an air permit application pending for the grain terminal. And I
Wow.
looked for it, and I know DEQ's system really well. Have all the resources, but I couldn't find it because we didn't know the name of the facility. And it,
Wow.
it didn't include grain in the name, right? It just said Greenfield.
Mm.
So it really, I think, shows what communities are up against. But then fortunately, the facility also needed a wetlands permit. And that was publicly noticed, unlike the DEQ air permit.
Mm-hmm.
So as Joy said, my memory was that you had first contacted me in July and it was the following March.
Mm-hmm.
And this really dusty bell in the back of my mind was like, wait a minute, wasn't somebody asking about a grain terminal in St. John the Baptist Parish? Could this be the same facility? So yeah, that was my very small role in the worst day of your life. But I'm glad to have been involved, and also I think one of the best days of your life when it got canceled.
Yes. Yes, and that was, I remember, and you brought up COVID. That day was the first day that me and Joe were able to be in the house with my parents. We were so afraid of our parents, getting COVID, them being in that really risky group, and them being older. And we were so happy because they had just been vaccinated. And so we were able to actually be in the house with them for the first time. And so I just remember, like, there was this air of freedom and peace, that we were all together as a family. And then the email from you popped up on my phone, and it was like, oh my God, we didn't even have a chance to really get over this trauma of COVID. Now we had this other battle that we were going to fight. Right. And so I will, and we have more questions for you, Kim, but I will move on to Pam Spees, who also was part of our fight. So Pam, how did you first become involved with the Descendants Project?
Well, it seems like I've always been. It's hard to remember a time that we weren't connected, but I guess there was one. And I guess it was the first time you all, or maybe one of the first times you all held a town meeting or some sort of public meeting to talk about what was happening, at least what you knew at the time. And I just remember being just really taken by your concern and your passion for your community and your willingness to try to figure out what could be done. And I think at that time you were sort of puzzled, like, why couldn't you get the parish council to have a meeting about this and have some sort of public conversation about it? of course, that sent us into the some of the zoning issues that had been lurking for decades over this land, and then we sort of took, went on from there. But I think, what you were doing in terms of just trying to sound the alarm, but also bring people together and just try to have a conversation about it, right? Which was hard enough, but even having that conversation begins to change things, and it begins to open up things, and that's certainly what I felt in that first meeting you all had, which was necessarily on Zoom.
Right.
So that would have been, I guess, around the spring of 2021 as well.
Well, and thanks for reminding me, Pam, that what people didn't initially know at first was that we had asked our council member, when we were hearing talk about this grain terminal, we had went to him specifically and said, if you hear anything, let us know. We will begin organizing as a community, because we do not want this in our community. And although we had asked him specifically to keep us updated, at that point Greenfield had contacted him, had asked to arrange a community meeting. However, we weren't included in that meeting. Although it was going to be right next door to us, instead the meeting was with a group that was in Edgard, and we only heard about it through secondhand knowledge. And then we did ask for a council. We asked for the parish president, asked for meetings, and no one ever responded to us. They didn't put us on the agenda. So we did ask, but again, no one listened to us.
These plans are years in the making before community members often find out. By the time we find out, it's already a done deal, as they like to say, in many ways. And we're not even, as I've said before, that I can't tell a community what they do want or what they don't want. But one thing we should have is fair access to the information so that we can make those decisions. And a lot of decisions we find out are made before we even know that a project is attempting to come into our community, which is very problematic. And that was certainly the case with Greenfield when we saw all these letters of support, when we saw like all of the meetings that were being held and these different types of engagements they were having without us even knowing that this was a potential.
Well, and so we'll come back to you, Pam, but I want to go to, because you brought up zoning, and so I'm going to go to Justin, who is our zoning expert guru, and talk about how you got involved, started participating in this case.
Yeah, well, thankfully I'd met Pam through working in St. James, where I'd been looking into doing research on the land use and zoning there. And so that was really thanks to that connection. But I remember also it being COVID, and I was recovering from an accident, and I had a period of time I hadn't done much work, and all of a sudden there was this project that was, I was drawing attention to, and I felt like I remember doing some of the initial overlays and trying to look at, and because really only was available was information online at that time. And I remember going to the parish websites and looking and trying to figure out what was the zoning, and depending upon where I looked, I got different answers. Even within the parish website, that there was contradictory documents that pointed to this being residential, to it being industrial, to it being industrial with a buffer. And all of this inconsistency was something that immediately just was like, red flag. It's just not being able to understand how this could proceed. In addition to that, once we did actually get a chance to meet in person, I remember just distinctly being charmed and falling in love with the cafe and under the oak tree, and being in person, just seeing the location there where your neighborhood was, and then also going when we had a chance to go together with a couple of the researchers, with I think CCR and the Bucket Brigade, we went to the parish offices and basically feel like we stormed the offices to try to figure out what was the zoning, and then finding unbelievably the actual zoning plat map on the zoning administrator's desk that he didn't realize was actual official zoning, and then be able to, you know, take, you know, someone, I forget who exactly, took a picture of that we grabbed that we weren't supposed to have, and that's how we, you know, but really piecing together the mystery of the documents was a key part of my role in this. That it just kept going. It was like the pulling the thread, you know, that just kept unraveling, and which really I think led to then the strength of the legal case work. And so, yeah.
I remember that day when we went into the St. John Parish offices and tried to figure out where the map was, and Joy and Pam were on one side of the building, in the vault, and Justin and I were on the other side. And it was really like an episode of Scooby-Doo. It really, when we came together, it was like, you wouldn't believe what we found. And y'all like, we wouldn't believe what you found. So it was just, that moment was insane. And it could have been like, seriously, a television episode. It, really it was so shocking. Well,
I think
Go ahead, Justin.
There was I think we also realized that there was some kind of passageway in the you know, that they could communicate behind closed doors, where they were running around in the back between the two sides, between the council side and the you know, administrator's side with the parish permitting office. And they were, you know, basically literally backstage running around trying to figure out how to, you know, deal with this, because we were all up in their business, you know.
And remember, we couldn't get the information any other way. It was we had to go in the vault, had to go there in person, had to get this information under like their observation. So this was the what we had to kind of fall into in order to get that information.
And we had council members while we were in the vault. Is a room. The room with all of the meeting minutes and all of the meeting agendas from decades. And we were in the vault at times, and we had council members that came and like stood in the doorway and were looking at us as we were going through this information. So like not the, you know, kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think they definitely didn't seem comfortable to have us there all up in I say all up in their business, but it's literally all up in our own business, right? But yeah, it was quite adventurous, if nothing else. Well, and I'll get before I think I'm gonna let's go to William, because we might actually get into the background of that zoning case, which kind of ties into what happened 30 years ago. But last but not least is William Most from Most and Associates. So William, if you could remember how we first got connected, and if you could explain that, please.
Yeah, I remember being introduced to you and starting to pick up some of the briefs and reading some of them and thinking, there's no way. I mean, these women as children were witnesses to corruption involving a parish president about this piece of land, and now it's happening all over again 30 years later. It can't possibly be the same piece of land, right? But it was, and just I was really struck by the way history repeats itself, right? History rhymes, history repeats itself. And for an organization that you founded that is so focused on sort of drawing the connections between the past and today and the future, it's really pretty extraordinary the way these things all connect. And I've always been impressed by the way you all have brought in the history of your ancestors and the history of the land, connected it to what is happening in the parish today, and then focusing on not just the fight in front of you, but thinking about what's next also is pretty inspirational and pretty rare.
Oh, well, thank you. I think, William, you are, as we sit in 2025, a year later, I think you're the one that's kind of carrying on this last, well, I don't know if it's the last leg. Well, maybe it is the next leg of this fight. But what I will do is I'm actually going to go back to you want to go back to the first win, like when with Pam and that zoning case? Let's go back to Pam, and then we'll talk to Pam about our initial zoning win. So Pam, you remember way back when in 20?
Right. I can't even judge this on years, because I feel like, like you said, I feel like we've been knowing each other forever, and we think, well, it's only been 5 years or 4 years. So
That seems so long.
I know.
But yeah, Pam, like what? Because at first you weren't. You like were on a meeting, but you did not see yourself as necessarily being able to help us. But then the issue of the zoning, which me and Joe had kind of pointed to as what William was talking about as our experience as children, became like when did you feel like that was the thing that we needed to address?
Well, I think you made the case, right? I mean, it's and of course Justin helping us understand what these different maps said, and just looking at all of the inconsistencies. And then the more, every time Justin would go look at the land records, there'd be another mystery that would crop up, like a missing map or a missing document or a strange note written by the clerk threatening to prosecute anyone who tore it out. And I think, and then understanding how that zoning happened, the context and the corruption surrounding it, and really just beginning to understand how it all fit together. It was, it seemed like something that had to, the question had never been put directly to the parish before, and you had to do it, through a legal case because you weren't getting answers, you weren't getting meetings, so you had to go to court and challenge the circumstances of that original zoning. And nothing is ever assured. You never know going in whether you can believe in your case, and you can believe that the law and the facts are on your side, and but you never know what the circumstances are going to be when it finally comes to a decision. And thankfully we got the right ruling out of the district court, and it nullified that old zoning ordinance. And but I think telling the story, it's so rare that, like William said, it's so rare that you have someone who can speak to the sweep of time in it, right? So I think it was really important to have your perspective and what you remembered as 10 or 11-year-olds with all of this happening, and the co-conspirators coming into the house to try to buy the property out from under your family and displace your entire family and neighborhood, right? And you narrowly escaped that. And so then here you are 30 years later, dealing with a similar situation. So yeah, I think it was just the more we learned, and it's still happening. That we're still learning things that will shock and surprise you, and there's no end to it. And there's more to say about that, but I won't go down that road at this point. But I think what you've been able to do while that was happening, right? Because even before the decision, you just continue to try to build, and you continue to try to move forward to a different vision for the future of your community. And that's important. That's important because so often, I think what we've learned is that you can't just be in a defensive posture and try to keep something at bay. It's what are you living for, and what are you building toward? And I think that was really amazing to see along the way, while your fate was still hanging out there in terms of that particular case, which is, all of this is still playing out, but where you are now and what you've been able to build is really exceptional.
Well, thank you. And we couldn't have certainly, we can't imagine not knowing you all, so many people that, like me and Joe constantly, as difficult as things got, it was like, at least we know this group of wonderful people that we would have never known. Right. And so that's what we kind of just always reminded, was just grateful for you to have your help with us.
And,
of course.
And having you all here, and having our community members who are also been so a big part of this fight, and then combining the knowledge, right? Seeing the knowledge sharing, or or having the information and then having a community member say, oh yeah, but we call it this. Or we say like all these, they have a terminology for it, but maybe one that's not the legal or scientific terms in many ways. So I just think like having the community coming together and working with everyone here has been really, I mean,
It's been
important.
powerful.
It's an important and powerful time, and a lot of ways healing from the 90s when we had to fight Formosa back then. And it was like a way of really finally addressing the past and a sin, a crime that's been committed in our community and no one ever apologized for.
And I will say, I mean, even though it was 30 years ago, but me and Joe are still only 25.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't really. Don't question the math. Don't question
This is why everybody wants this land, because it is magical anti-aging.
Time works backwards sometimes. But I will also, so there were another important component of this fight was Tulane Environmental Law Clinic's role and Kim Terrell's role with the permitting and with the would turn it to be our Section 106, especially the core permitting that was required. So Kim, could you kind of speak to the role that the different types of permits that came up and why it was important to keep track and to fight back against these permits?
Yeah, absolutely. So Greenfield needed an air permit because they were going to release a substantial amount of air pollution if they had built this facility. Like I said before, that permit slipped by quietly under the radar, even though people were looking for it. But then because it was located in an area with wetlands, it also needed a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. And so because the Corps is a federal agency, anytime that they are going to grant a permit that could negatively impact a historic place, they have to do this consultation process under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. And so for the Environmental Law Clinic, it was kind of a new area. The clinic was really used to working on wetlands permits, but without that historic preservation piece. So for the students, the law students, it was a great opportunity to see how these different fields intersect and to understand how environmental concerns influence concerns about historic preservation and vice versa. So it was also a really unusual situation because y'all literally had a seat at the table during that process. In my humble opinion, I think that's one of the key, things that made a difference is that historic consultation process required engagement from stakeholders, including Descendants Project, including, other community groups and attorneys and everybody here. So it allowed, for the first time, it allowed like a real-time call and response type of scenario with Greenfield's, propaganda, and then the experts and community members in the same room to be able to push back. I remember when Justin pointed out this issue with contours for a noise analysis, and I'm not going to steal his thunder. I want him to tell that story because that was epic.
So many epic moments.
That process with the Corps of Engineers with us at the table, it was about 2 years, almost 2 years of us in that permitting in that process, and as 2 years of us intensely looking at the historic and cultural resources. And what I will say is that with all of us, and Joe and I, it's not a secret that one of our first careers were as staff members at Plantation. So we were part of this network of historic sites and structures. So we came in with kind of a more than base knowledge of the history that was there, and we're also descendants, right? So because we had engaged at these sites, but also information that we had gotten as descendants of people, in the community of people that have been there for 10 generations. So when we started pulling up this history, I think eventually Greenfield knew that they're just coming up with not coming up. I mean, they're just finding more and more and more, which I think ultimately was the reason why, which they cited as the reason why they canceled. But
I mean, also too, we are the local community. We know the area. We know the grounds. We know when they're saying one thing, it's one thing to have a lawyer or some scientist who is zooming in from New York to tell you about your own history and your own land. And you versus you living there, we were around their land and their property more than they were. And so that was the advantage we had as a community of having that input and say, no, that does not make any sense. And many times, what surprised me is that they would just sit across from us silent because they had no answer. They had no reasonable answer for the questions. Like just the silence. The silence was so loud with that group.
like they looked like they were being held hostage.
Yeah,
it was like blink twice if you need help. It said such nuts things.
Right.
But well, we'll go to Justin and Justin, and maybe if there's some things during that process that any of us remember that either struck you as as unbelievable. But yeah, Justin, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to talk about the funny, just unbelievable exhibits that they did, information that they presented, but I just want to pause for a second and reflect on just how unique I think, and it was the Corps trying to pioneer doing something very different with their consultation process and including the community as part of this process, which happens all the time, I guess, unbeknownst to us, with is just the applicants and the Corps and the state officials kind of in a set of emails, essentially kind of finding a way to agree to some really burdensome facility. And I really want to just reflect that the courage that you sent that letter to the Corps, I believe actually initiated that was authored by, you two, Joe and Joy, that opened the door to this process that was novel. And I think that it shed all kinds of light on a process that really needs more light shed on it. But maybe unfortunately that door has closed for the time being just because of how EJ and DEI have just basically been stripped and erased as language even, in the federal government right now. But so I think that there's something that it was a window of opportunity that allowed us to have a seat at the table and really observe closely this permitting process that probably happens invisibly all the time without the participation of communities.
Well, and by the way, Justin, just to quickly, the public notice that came out that Kim was talking about earlier, in it they said that they did not believe, the Corps did not believe that there were any sites that were on the National Register Historic District. No historic sources that they knew could be impacted. It's literally right next to Whitney National Register Historic District and next to Evergreen, which is a National Historic Landmark. So even your public notices were incorrect.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that was valuable was that because there were historic sites that were within the area of potential effect, we were able to actually start looking at the impacts. And that is something that really should happen all the time. But it just, the permitting systems in place that don't really allow for meaningful insight. So we were able to look at real time how their Greenfield's consultants, Ramball, other people, these data manipulators, we'll call it that, were able to present information around, magically, like that just showed it to have no impact. Like for instance, this 300-foot tower that was right nearby your community was going to not be visible because it was like this thin screening. They've managed to find one tree that was going to, and like, all the line of sight lines model they use, and this is just kind of the thing that can be so maddening, is seeing information being grossly misshown and interpreted in ways to falsify a conclusion or to lead to a conclusion that's convenient.
One of my favorites was the lighting of it. Was that it was going to be the dim lights around it, and it was like the most romantic grain terminal that could be.
No brighter than the candlelight.
Yeah, no brighter than candlelight. It was like I could just hear music. Someone that magically sound like the symphony. So
right, and then it wasn't going to be any louder than the background whisper in the library.
Yeah.
It was like, who was supposed to believe this? Yeah. Oh, anyway. But and I think what Kim was referring to was about the sound, if you remember, because that was hilarious.
That was, I think, if I remember serves correct. So basically, they had done a model for sound analysis and decibel volume, and the sound, because it was all the marine facility on one side of the levee, and then all the equipment on the other side, but that the levee was going to sort of magically dampen the sound, even though the levee crown is about 30 feet high, and the buildings and equipment go up 300 feet, but somehow the modeling didn't account for the difference in height. So all this, the levee just kind of dampened and softened all the sound, and the lines and the intensity would just kind of corresponded very uncannily with the levee, which is like, okay.
Right.
But pointing, I mean, there was some, we could hear a pin drop kind of in moments when we were able to, comment on these presentation of their analyses, and it was just like dumb, it was like, really?
It was really hilarious. Are you
I think
remember?
yeah,
Oh,
I mean, I don't think the court could really comment, but I think that they were also shocked on some points. They couldn't. They had to hold their neutrality.
Yeah,
right.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact that we live right next to the levee and we hear
Sound all the
noises all the
time.
time from the river, from the other side. We can hear the train crossing on the other side of the river. So yeah, just to even pretend it wouldn't
Yeah.
make any sense anyway. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Well, and I think Greenfield, like Greenfield blamed it on the Corps of Engineers in this process, and even other people have weighed in on it. But if they have a question, if they really have a question about it, they need to listen to that section, those 106 meetings that are publicly available, because you will see when a company really makes a bad choice, a bad selection of a site, one that has a community that has so much historic resources, the types of information that they have to go in there with, which was just bunk. I mean, everything about it was just, they couldn't answer, and the amount of money that they were spending on attorneys to sit in that room and to say the most most asinine things was like, who do you think you're fooling?
well, like I always said before, we were Greenfield's best friend. We really were the ones
Yeah,
who
they weren't
were
ready.
telling them very honest answers. We did not want their money. Everybody else wanted their money, and we did not. We were the most honest with them, and we just told them why it would not work. And they knew this, at least some parts of it, before they purchased the land. Had they listened, they wouldn't have made that investment in the project that would not be able to work and coincide with us living next to it.
Well, on that note, that kind of takes us into, and there's still some other updates about that, including our historic preservation. As a result of the status, as a result of that process, we were considered eligible, still considered eligible for historic district status and National Historic Landmark status. That eligibility was supposedly taken away from us with this administration on appeal from our parish president and from the LDEQ secretary at the time. Again, that was unfortunate, but we still believe in the strength of us having, us having that history there, regardless of what designation is there or not. You can't remove that history. But one of the other strong positions that we have is actually the zoning, which takes us back to William, because even though we won the zoning case initially and got the ordinance wiped away, nullified from 30 years ago, something else happened which brought it back. So I will kind of leave that part to you, William.
Yeah. So I think this shows how this has been such a team effort, right? Because it was the discovery of some of the documents that y'all are talking about that led Pam's team to be able to undo the zoning from 1990, right? And turn it back to what it should have been always, of residential zoning. And then, of course, we had a series of attempts by the parish to go back again to industrial. And y'all stuck with it. You got temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions. Every time they would try and rezone the land, your teams would identify ways that they were breaking the law, and the courts would step in. And so after many attempts, it was rezoned back to industrial last year, but y'all didn't decide to stop fighting, because I think what you have recognized is that if you don't stay with it, you're just going to see history repeat itself again, right? Because the land was going to be used for one industrial purpose in the 1990s, And just because that what didn't happen didn't mean that this land is safe forever, right? Because Greenfield came in later. And so I think you've recognized that the only way to be sure that your land is protected the way it should be is to make sure that the legal protections are in place. And so that's why you currently have 3 different lawsuits still pending right now. The one that I think is most closely connected to what we're talking about is you're trying to show that existing parish laws should apply to protect this property. There is a law that says if you're going to have heavy industrial and you've got residential neighborhoods of a certain concentration of residential units, you have to keep those separate, right? Nobody wants a sewage plant right next to their house. And so many parishes have reasonable rules. Let's keep these things separated, in this case by 2,000 feet. And so that's what you're still fighting for and what our team is working on right now.
I think you touch on something that's it's been frustrating for us as seeing where there have been projects in other communities that have been just honestly apartments. And those have been shut down because they were afraid that would bring too much traffic, too much crime into certain neighborhoods. So here we are, and there's actually ordinance against how tall the grass is, and all, so we can have a 300-foot grain terminal next to us, and the council is praising that, and have this industry next to us is bringing all of these trucks. No one cares about that. Well, other communities that are actually in most cases predominantly more white communities, they have all of these type of protection. So the laws are just applied so differently depending on what's your what's your neighborhood. Yeah, and we definitely saw that where we were going to, there was a zoning change case across the river for the dirt involving the levee, Clay, and the way that the council was very supportive of that community who didn't want a zoning change, and allowed the council gave them so much latitude when it came to being able to get up and give their comments, and them going over 3 minutes, and I'm gonna give my 3 minutes to someone else, no problem. And then when we were there to comment, that was so much more restrictive. And William, if you could kind of also touch on the Port of South Louisiana in the cooperative endeavor agreement that we're also still challenging as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the difficulties here is there's been so many different kinds of misconduct floating around this that just sort of focusing on some to challenge it has been at times difficult, right? Yes. Because we've identified, open meetings violations. We found out that port commissioners were secretly talking about stuff by email when they're supposed to be talking about that publicly, right? We've discovered that there have been violations of the First Amendment, right? Joy, you were threatened with arrest under a law that was declared unconstitutional more than a decade ago, right? You've uncovered secret corruption. You've uncovered the fact that, unbeknownst to anybody in the parish, the parish president's husband had a financial interest in this project going forward, and no one was told about that. Right. And then finally, there's all sorts of problems related to the dealings between the port, the sheriff, and Greenfield in the way that the land was sort of, quote unquote, given to the port to keep it off the tax rolls. And then even the promises that Greenfield made to provide money to the community were not enforced. And so because other people wouldn't enforce those promises, the Descendants Project has stepped in to make sure the community has a voice and that promises are kept.
Yeah, and like you said, it's what we need to do to protect ourselves in the future. And if, the port can offer, tax deals, that and in exchange get millions of dollars, and then, it doesn't work out. And it's like, okay, those millions of dollars that you said you were gonna, that you owe the public, you don't have to be held responsible to that. If we don't uphold it and make them uphold it, then it just makes it easier for them to do it the next time someone else wants to come in and they want to, again, take taxes off the roll.
That's right. And so it's illegal in Louisiana for public entities to just give away money or give away property, right? And something that you've pointed out is that when the port and the sheriff just allowed Greenfield to keep delaying the millions of dollars it owed. That's fundamentally taking something away from the public and letting Greenfield keep the money that they promised to give.
Right.
So, you've stuck with it. And even after Greenfield said, we're not building this terminal anymore, I think y'all are looking to the future and saying, well, we can't stop there, right? We have to make sure that we send a signal that this land is protected, and also more generally, that corruption won't be tolerated.
Right.
I think too that also like Justin touched on with the erasure and trying to erase us and communities and the changing of language and laws. And one thing that what will not happen anymore is that we won't be erased. Like no matter what changes, that it's harder and harder now to make us go away. And we're here for the long haul. And that's why whatever we have to do, we're going to do it. And I don't care. I mean, maybe the parish president does call us two poop emojis, but I don't care. It's not. I'm still going to fight back. It's not going to stop us. But so yeah.
Look, those poop emojis were very revelatory.
Yeah,
like
right.
even
Yes.
with that First Amendment case, it's like Nelson Mandela has a good saying, like it's not whether you win or lose, it's whether you win or learn. And we learned a lot of information that was so crucial to us protecting that land, regardless of what the First Amendment case outcome was, which by the way we're appealing. But it's just getting that transparency, getting that information was just so remarkably invaluable for us.
I think we're very cute poop emojis.
Well, and talking about someone that who can't be knocked down is I'm going to switch it to Kim Terrell and talking about like ongoing fights, because I do think the success of Greenfield and just the amazing work and research that Kim T has done to listen to us and to expose the truth here in Cancer Alley has resulted in something that is unfortunate for Tulane University. So, Kim, do you want to give us an update?
Yeah, sure. So I was at Tulane Environmental Law Clinic for 7 years as a staff scientist. And the whole time I was kind of told, like, hey, stick to the facts and the data. Like, never say what an agency should do or what the state should do. Leave that to community members, and you're a scientist, just focus on the data. So that worked for 7 years. And then last fall, things started kind of heating up. And it was just the darndest thing. It happened kind of right after Greenfield canceled their project. And the main investor, Chris James, has close ties to Tulane. He used to be on the Tulane Board of Trustees. He's a Tulane alum, as am I. That is literally the only thing I have in common, I think, with Chris James. I hope. But so there was this kind of like increased scrutiny from the Tulane administration that started shortly after the Greenfield victory. And then this past spring, I published a study on petrochemical jobs. And, a lot of my research sort of provides data that supports what community members have known for decades. And this was another example of that. And so no surprise, we analyzed data from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and found that people of color don't get anywhere near their fair share of industrial jobs across the U.S., specifically petrochemical jobs. And what was interesting was when we kind of zoomed in to Louisiana and we looked at the jobs parish by parish, the worst offender, the most extreme place was St. John the Baptist Parish. So in St. John, the population is 69% people of color, but they make up only 19% of people who have high-paying industrial jobs in the parish. And what's really interesting is that there is almost no racial education gap in St. John. So if you look at the proportion of white people who have a college degree and the proportion of people of color who have a college degree, it's almost identical.
Wow.
Yet you have this massive disparity in who gets the jobs. And what was really telling was, when we all had a seat at the Greenfield table, it was like a wedding, right? Like Greenfield people sit on one side and everyone else sits on the other
Bad
side.
romance.
Yeah, it's a toxic romance. And we're all sitting across from all these people who have already been hired for these
Yes.
really high paying positions, and most of them are white, right? And like, there were a couple of black employees, and it just, I don't know, to me, it felt like this tokenism that just, I don't know, it really exemplified the whole problem from my perspective.
Well, I think that when you point out too, also the scholarships that were offered from Greenfield, it was specifically to the community college in St. John Parish, which is nothing wrong with that. But it always struck me how there was never any offer for like a scholarship to Tulane.
Right.
Being that Christopher James is one that is on is so connected. The jobs that were only connected to Greenfield Industrial, so that was never like insurance company, because one of the supporters had insurance, and that was never a career opportunity for the community. So it was very like, here is what we're going to give you. It was never really what they had. It was very just
Bottom
noticeable.
rung jobs,
Yeah, like
yeah.
I'm going to give you this, and you're going to be happy with that, versus all these other opportunities that remained that they kept away from us.
Yeah, and we could never. You asked a good question during one of the meetings. They kept saying that it was a $75,000 for Greenfield, $75,000 average salary. And we were like, where did you get $75,000 from? Because that average is like at least twice as high as the average salary for grain terminal. And to this day, we are still waiting on that, on the job data, right? But yeah, that research is so key to the economic blackmail. This is a term that I read in the book that someone is using. And I think it's so accurate. But we are told that unless we allow these industries to come into our communities, that our population is going to continue to leave, and like they're the only thing that's standing between our community being saved or not. I mean, for us in Wallace, our population grew by 30%, not because we added industry, but because we added housing, right? So it's like the statistics and the facts just are simply
Plus
not adding up.
And they're subsidized. So the jobs, when you get a job, you're paying so much more that job is actually paying a person working the job when it comes to these industrial tax breaks. So yeah, so Kim, we're glad that I know that was tough. It was heartbreaking and disappointing for all of us. But I'm so glad that you are still fighting, continuing to do this work. And all I got to say is, LSU, we're LSU grads. Christopher James is a Tulane grad, and it's been a kind of a rivalry. And I guess LSU, LSU won this round. I would not, Lord. Let me tell you, you
Lord.
don't even want to deal with all of the stuff at LSU. But come on.
Yes.
Yeah, if we're talking about academic freedom, I think it's a race to the bottom.
Exactly.
Yes.
This is a whole can of worms.
Yes, I did. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
But I guess that was the piece I sort of left out, was that after all of this, I resigned from Tulane, and I'm now at Environmental Integrity Project, which maybe has the unintended consequence of removing me from some political pressure. So things work out in interesting ways, and I think sometimes bad behavior backfires.
Wow. Yep. Kim Unchained.
I know, right?
Well, we are in our last 10 minutes, so I guess I'll just leave it up to I just go around and I think what's the most important thing that you want to share to people that are out there about your experience with Greenfield or with anything in this case? Just share any last thoughts, and actually for Pam, you had some upcoming litigation as well. So I'm gonna start with you first to touch on that litigation, then kind of open it up for people to share whatever they'd like to.
Well, I'll just start by saying I'm struck by just listening to all of us that people listening to this might think all of this can't be true. Like all of this, like all of this corruption, all of the violating of their own procedures in each of these bodies just can't be true. And not only is it true, we're not even telling you the half of it
Not even
because
half.
there's not enough time.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
just in the case that William's leading right now, the new zoning case. I mean, just what the company and the parish have done to try to manipulate a 2,000 foot buffer zone, and get around that requirement
Right.
is pretty astonishing in and of itself. That's just one more example. There's so many more. And I think, when Justin was talking about the historic preservation process and how novel it seemed, the thing is, it's not supposed to be novel. That's the problem,
Right.
is that most people just living our lives don't know how to engage that process. And like you said, the first notice that went out said there's nothing to see here. There's no historic preservation concern. Um, and so people who they're just living their lives. I mean, how do you even begin, right? How do you even begin to understand what's going on? But that kind of process, and I think usually these companies, they just get a pass. They're just rubber stamped, and nobody's really looking at what a house of cards it all is, right? And that, we sort of know it, but when you see it up close, it is just astonishing. And so I think what you've unearthed, and and to keep going, that you can keep going and you keep challenging this until you get this nailed down,
Yeah.
till you get what the port has done is wrong. How much, you've got politicians and government officials running around trying to bring in more massive industry but they're not collecting the taxes they're supposed to be. They're just giving away money, and infrastructure is crumbling, and it is this myth. It's this myth of economic benefit that comes, and no vision whatsoever for
None.
anything else. And we're in hurricane season. We're coming up on a very important anniversary. You all went through Ida over in Southwest Louisiana. We had two hurricanes back to back in 2020 during COVID. It's just, it is beyond that folks keep doubling down on this as the only way to go is just, it's, it's unwise, to put it mildly, and it's dangerous. And
Yeah.
I think about the lessons people can draw from what you've been through, and where you are now and at every step of the way. Like you said, you were never assured that you'd be sitting here today having this conversation.
Right.
And the fight is still going on, right? It's not over. You're going to keep going.
Right.
Um, and so I think about others who might be hearing this, and maybe they're just beginning to get involved. Maybe something's just now approaching their community, and I think find each other. It's just find each other. You're not crazy. It is that jacked up
Yep.
half
Yep.
the time, and and find your friends and build community through it, because that's the thing that can hope, the hope of that can carry you through.
Yeah, definitely. Find your community. Find your community. And then and Pam, there's some other litigation as well. You have a moratorium in St. James Parish. There's also burial grounds lawsuit that the Descendants Project is a part of as well. And like, we have these cases that they seem like they're individual cases, but they're quite obviously they're not. It's the protection. We're protecting the burial grounds that are on, Greenfield lands. And no, they may not have found them yet, but we know that they're on there according to the state archaeologist, right? And so, again, we are continuing in different along the river, we all have these similar battles that we're still fighting. So yeah, I'll just open it up to anyone, to Justin, and to William, with any last parting words.
Yeah, I guess just to kind of build off of what Pam was saying is that the fight is not over, but I mean, I think just to kind of point picture where we did get a major victory. This company is no longer pursuing their plans, and I feel like that was not clear at any point up to this. So to kind of paint a picture of how we got to this point, it was by continual pressure, and like I almost think of it as like trying to squeeze a balloon, and it's like we're trying to like squeeze it, and it goes this way, and then that way, and then it's like at no point did it feel like we're really being helped by the parish or by the company or in fact they were actually turns out part of the antagonists in this and we're pursuing rezoning and trying to make it and and it was really the persistence I think that pushed the company into a corner that was created by led by you guys but by building an unusual team and by continually finding new levels and layers to apply pressure. I think part of what's maybe not the how you guys built connections at the highest levels in the National Trust for Historic Preservation at the UN, how you started going into traveling overseas and building this conversation around it that was much larger than just a parish permitting fight. Is really important to tell. I mean, it's so hard when I've never been in a parish council meeting where I felt such blatant disregard by the elected leaders for their own community, and it really was shocking to me to see that and to be at the meeting when I saw just the visual sneering, when it's like these are the elected leaders. They may be elected by the people. We may be in a democracy, but with how it really functions, who sets the agenda is the money,
right? In
these parishes, and that's something that is more profound that needs to change. That is connected to the larger fight in many layers of our government, unfortunately.
Yep, yeah. The money sets the agenda. The money.
So well said.
Right, and William, did you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
I'll just say it's been a pleasure working with this entire team. Every single person here brings something to it that no one else has, and it's been a true team effort. I think if you removed any one of the people on this call or any other people who have worked on this, the probability of success would have been a lot lower. So it really took everybody bringing their unique talents and expertise and knowledge to the table to get this to where it is now.
Thank you. And I will say that about our team, like as Joe mentioned earlier, the amount of knowledge that our community has, and anytime that we went to any of our experts, our scientists, our attorneys, and we said, here's what the community is saying, here's what we found, everyone listens to us. Right, and takes that information, like takes it seriously. If it's Kim, when you have Black community members saying, like, we're not getting the jobs, right? Or if you have someone that is saying, like, there's a particular feature of the land that people don't know about, and like we need to pursue it, or like there's issues coming up with the zoning, right? You all listen to us, and we're so so humble and so respectful of that community knowledge. And so I thank you. Just happy anniversary. And we will celebrate, okay? Yeah. We will partay. To our community that stuck along, that were there with us, and who trusted us in this fight, we are immensely grateful and thankful to you. We thank our ancestors for being there alongside us, with this fight. And yeah, Joe, you have anything to ask me?
I'll just end with the way that the Black communities along the river survived for many generations is through networking and making sure everyone in their community was strong, but also the network of strong communities along the river. And I know that we've had some with the industrial development. We've lost some of these communities, but many of them are still here, and that's what we are. Well, our mission is to make sure that all of our communities are networked together and as strong as can possibly be. And I think this is our teamwork is another example of a network that is strengthening these Black descended communities along the river, and we will not be erased. And what we are feeling now, the momentum, I think our ancestors brought all of us all together now in this moment, and we've made them exceptionally proud that we're still here fighting back, and not just fighting, but winning against some really powerful opponents. And I think the victory against Greenfield was just another example of the power of our ancestors combined with the power that we have here now in this day and age.
And I just want to add, I just want to add one thing, because I'm infamous for adding one more thing, just one more thing. But I do want to say within this year that Greenfield canceled its plans. As a Descendants Project, we are in the process of calculating the economic impact of the Descendants Project. And this is not even the whole total, but for our construction projects, as well as our events and programs that we've had, we're over $500,000 of economic impact that we have spread through other community, through other small businesses, mostly local, mostly African American businesses. So that's not even our full total. I think that probably within a year we're looking close to almost $1 million. And probably over the course of our organization, I think we've reached almost 2 million. So at $2 million of impact, we now have a staff of about 12 people. So we've grown to like the impact of small businesses, right? And what we've been able to do, contributions to the school, donations, and then again, just helping small businesses. We're really proud that we are holding our own, and we are, I think, strengthening our community as well. So with that, that is the final words. And again, congratulations, happy anniversary. And to everyone that's joined us streaming, thank you for being here with us for this evening.
Yeah, shouts of joy.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Good night. Thank you. Done.
Clear.
All right.